Salams, you're watching People's Dispatch, and this is the Daily Debrief, a weekend episode of the Daily Debrief, coming to you from our studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhant Ani, and on the show today, we have a long-awaited update on the COVID-19 pandemic, where things stand today with regard to transmission of the virus in major countries and around the world, trends that are being seen on that front, as well as vaccination and why it remains to be important around the world. We will have Dr. Vinita Bal, an immunologist, talking to us on the subject. Dr. Bal, welcome to the show. Thanks for giving us your time today. First up, I wanted to get a sense because, a lot of us have who've been doing regular news programs, whether it's mainstream media or more independent outlets like us, COVID-19 seems to have gone on the back burner, even though it is very much still around, still a global health emergency. What is the latest from your perspective as someone involved with tackling the virus? What are for you the key points at this juncture?
I certainly think that the center stage that COVID had occupied for two plus years, from there it has to move to back burner. That doesn't mean one should pay no attention to it. But during COVID pandemic, many other diseases were put onto the back burner, and consequences of which we have seen, like rise in TB cases, resistance for TB, and so on and so forth. So that certainly needs to come into the major focus, but not letting completely lose focus on COVID. That is how I would see it. Primarily because from the epidemic and pandemic stage, the number of cases slowly came down, and I understand that there is a minor surge, at least in India. But I would consider that we have reached a stage of what we call endemicity. Or that there would be small clusters here or there, if at all they are there. So in a sense, because India has had large, especially the adult population, with one dose of vaccine completely, as the claims say, some subset of population with 2, and even a minor subset with 3 doses. And many people actually got infected either during the Delta wave or the Omicron wave. Even Omicron wave was more than a year ago. So I understand they have been, they disappeared quite a few months ago. But together, I see that Indian population to a significant extent should still be reasonably immune. In the sense, ordinary human beings who are not extremely vulnerable, like not the elderly, not heavily diabetic, not immunosuppressed, but standard young population. And we take pride in having young India. So in that sense, we as in population should be capable of defending what is happening.
Dr. Bal, yesterday was, of course, World Health Day. We did a short bit on the show talking about the significance of that in a time when health for all is something that public health activists are demanding, but systems are kind of moving in a different direction. From a COVID-19 perspective, from a vaccine perspective, where do you see things at the moment? Pediatric vaccines still a subject of some debate. Different countries issuing different kinds of directions. What are your thoughts in that regard? I
think in the context of vaccine, in India, there were really big manufacturers of vaccine in India, like Serum Institute. Not necessarily that alone, but Serum Institute's production capacity is very high. And because of circumstances in India, there were enough doses available reasonably on time. I know all of this was delayed, not very efficiently it was handled, but still many of us could get vaccine doses in affordable prices or completely free of cost. But if you look at many of the African nations which have no capacity for vaccine production, who were banking on somebody giving them enough doses, those countries have suffered more extensively because of the lack of the vaccination. So in that sense, if you ask me to prioritize, I would say in India, whoever has not taken second dose, and especially those who are quote unquote vulnerable population, the way I described earlier. So those people may be pushed to an extent to take another dose of vaccine, but otherwise, individuals from the third world, lower and middle income countries who have not received one dose also in many instances, those are the ones which should receive, primarily because in a way, like flu, COVID in the sense SARS-related infections are here to stay.
Right.
They are zoonotic infections in the sense first human being probably was infected because of some animal contact or something, but now SARS-CoV-2 has evolved so well within human beings that it's likely to stay, it's likely to spread. So we can't completely ignore it. In that sense, having vaccines, not just the two common vaccines which were given to many of us in India, but other vaccines, especially those which are containing newer variants or the current XBB 0.1.16 kind of variant, which is currently prevalent in most dominantly in India. So those are the ones for which, if there is a vaccine, that would have a little extra advantage. It's not easy to keep creating new vaccines, every 2 months or 3 months, but wherever possible, at least vulnerable people should be given doses of that kind of vaccine rather than good old standard what we received, Covishield and Covaxin.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Bal, for actually, in very simple terms, explaining where we are at with COVID-19 today and actually what people should be looking to do, and also pressurizing then their local health authorities, to those who have not had access yet, to get access to at least the first dose of that vaccine. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Right, so it's been a couple of weeks of frenzied diplomatic activity in East Asia, with China playing a central role in several negotiations between countries and groupings as well. We of course talked previously on the show on Daily Debrief about negotiations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Syria as well involved in some kind of normalization process of its diplomatic relations with other Arab League member countries. And now in the latest, the French president as well as the head of the European Union, Emmanuel Macron, and Ursula von der Leyen are in Beijing on an official visit. They've been greeted there by Chinese President Xi Jinping. This is what we are kind of talking about, the purpose of the visit. It's the most high-profile visit to China by a European head of state after the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's visit earlier in the year. We're going to figure out why Europe's proverbial good cop and bad cop are both in China at the same time, what kind of messaging is going on. And to talk more about this, as always, Anish is with us on the Daily Debrief. Anish, good to see you. What is happening? What is the latest you're hearing from the visit? What do the Europeans hope to achieve? And what is China's sort of skin in the game?
Well, the case of Macron, what we know so far is basically the central focus is business. So they want to bolster trade. They want to bolster business ties between China and France, and it is trying to eye for the vast market that, at a time when obviously the US and several of its allies are trying to isolate China, it is trying to gain a new market, which is obviously necessary because France, as we've known, as we've seen for the past several years now, has not been doing very well. A large part of that has to do with the fact that it does not have an export market to go for in most places, very often being sidelined with the European Union and also the United States and several of its bigger, more industrially powerful allies taking over several of the third world markets. So China definitely is like this opening that it is trying to take advantage of at this point in time. And so that is definitely at the center of it. But if you look at some of the key issues that have been talked about, one major request that came up, which is both something that Macron and von der Leyen have talked about to Xi Jinping, is that China needs to play a more constructive role in the Russia-Ukraine peace process.
Hmm.
This is obviously coming at a time when there have been significant is an understatement at this point. There have been like major ground shattering progress being made in the Middle East. We've seen the kind of sort of peace treaty in many ways, if you look at it, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and now we already have talks about Saudi Arabia wanting to move out of or end the war in Yemen. And so we are seeing like some really major seismic sort of shifts happening in several parts of the world, and China is at the center of it. China is the mediator through for these sort of peace process that is happening, and so they definitely want something of a similar sort of a constructive role from China, and a central role actually from China in the war in Europe right now. Which is affecting the Europeans more than anybody else at this point in time. So these are some of the, the crux of these meetings right now.
Yeah, but the issue, diplomatically speaking, at least, Anish, as we've discussed several times on this show before with yourself and with Prabir and other guests, that Europe itself seems confused about what its stand is in regards to this conflict, while of course, hopefully, peace is on the agenda and number one priority on the agenda for everyone involved in this process of conversation. But France and Germany, as the larger economies, have been a bit more circumspect in many regards with regard to how they engage with Russia, and China being, an ally, a close friend of Russia's in this case, even though it has a neutral stance. In all of this, sort of, the US will play a critical role, and we've had news coming in of now China imposing retaliatory sanctions on certain Taiwanese individuals as well as US individuals and organizations for sort of engaging in secessionist conversations. How does all of this fit in together with one set of allies being so divided amongst themselves on the subject of how to engage with these other nations?
Yeah, it's always it's always how national interests play out in the long run that matters. In diplomacy, we can always talk about principles and all these concerns, humanitarian concerns that the West very often talks about. But at the end of the day, like if your national interests do not align with the humanitarian concerns, you're not going to really pursue a hardline stance, be it Russia or China in the long run. So this is something that we're seeing. Like it's not really how do I put it? It's obviously there is a confused stand. We have seen Europe not having a very unilateral unanimous sort of stand when it came to Ukraine. There are multiple issues, not just domestically, but among these nations. But there are so this sort of meeting that happened with Beijing was definitely it's just part of this larger confusion. On the other hand, they have to also play to the gallery back home. They have to also show that they still uphold these sort of liberal values. And so when Taiwan comes up, or when other issues come up, it is going to always be the same old sort of Cold War rhetoric being played out. We need to see how these meetings, because we've seen meetings happen before with several Western leaders and their allies in Asia, and so over time it just fizzled out, or the conviction with which it happened, it didn't really translate into results that can actually work out. But yeah, so in the current instance, we need to just wait and see how it works out in Europe. But obviously, Taiwan is another thing that is going to always be an essential issue for how the West is trying to approach China, because obviously, on the one hand, the United States wants to change the status quo. It is very obvious. It is trying to engage with sort of secessionist forces that call for an independent Taiwan, or a Taiwanese identity or national identity separate from that of China or the Chinese identity. and which is not something that not only China agrees with, obviously, but also a large number of people in Taiwan who are essentially Chinese also do not agree with. And so this is something that is going to be at the center of the how the West tries to deal with China over the next year at least, until the next set of general elections that will be happening. We are already seeing the Kuomintang, the former President Ma completing his visit and actually calling out a more cautious tone, asking for the Taiwanese government to sue for peace rather than engage in provocations. And obviously, China retaliating against Tsai's meeting with McCarthy. And all of these instances, like, it shows there is going to definitely be a lot of fluttering happening in the so to say in the diplomatic realm, and that is obviously going to shape the manner in which these relations are going to go forward. And you need to really just, I mean, like, at this point, I keep saying this very often, but you need to really just wait and see how things really pan out, because very often things can just shift and change in a matter of seconds, in a matter of a day. And this is a time when everything is extremely volatile. The whole European trip wasn't something that anybody saw would be so significant, but it's happening, and it is actually, it might bring results, and that can also shift things in the long run. So we need to really wait and see how things pan out in all of these situations.
We will do that and have you with us as things develop. Anish, thanks for your time today. Next up, there's a lot going on in Pakistan on, of course, the economic front, the ongoing debt crisis, as well as a burgeoning food crisis emerging in that country. In the midst of all of this, Parliament has rejected a direction from the Supreme Court of Pakistan to hold snap polls in two provinces, that is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Punjab. The court had ordered last month that polls be held within 90 days, but Parliament now says that a majority of legislators have voted against following through on those orders, and instead have asked for a full panel of judges from the Supreme Court to relook at the matter. In the midst of all of this, the government has also announced a nationwide crackdown on armed groups and terrorist activities. Shreya covers the region for People's Dispatch and is with us now for more details on what exactly is going on in Pakistan. First up, Shreya, what does this essentially mean? We were talking previously about how these directions from the court would actually probably have the most amount of benefit for the Imran Khan-led Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party. But what is the current political scenario, and what is the stand that the government is taking?
Thanks for having me, Siddhant. So there's been a tussle that's been going on between the government led by Shehbaz Sharif in Pakistan and the judiciary. Good to have a backdrop of what's been happening for the past 2 weeks. So basically, the government, after the provincial government in Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which was led by Imran Khan's PTI, was dissolved. The Supreme Court, as the law says, within 90 days has directed towards another election for these two provinces, and they wanted it to happen according to the law by April 30. Now, initially, the government delayed these polls, citing two reasons: that it's the economic crisis that's been going on, that you have been talking about. We've been consistently covering it on People's Dispatch. That's one reason. And the second one was that the Shehbaz Sharif government is facing, quote unquote, political challenge from the opposition, that's from Imran Khan. The reason why these governments were dissolved by Imran Khan's led party was to demand snap polls, which he himself has been demanding for a year now. So we know that there's been a political crisis. Now add to this tussle between judiciary and the Shehbaz Sharif government. There's been more moves from either sides. For example, the government moved a law to reduce the powers of the Chief Justice. And on the other hand, the judiciary recently, they abolished the sedition law, which has been used historically in this country to, crush down political dissent. So something like that. Again, the Supreme Court rejects that, the dealing of snap polls is illegal. And the latest that we're talking about is that the Parliament has now rejected the Supreme Court decision to, call these delaying
Call
of snap
elections, yeah.
polls illegal. So it's like a whole mix of things that's been happening. A political crisis, a democratic crisis, because two organs of the government, the judiciary, the executive, having such a tussle, it really depicts that the all's not well in Pakistan, really.
Yeah.
And why Imran Khan is again at the center of it? Because the current government perceives a threat from the opposition. We know there's been a political crisis continuously going on since he, lost power. He was impeached by the parliament last year in April, exactly 1 year ago. So we know that's been going on, and I think, recently the judiciary also bailed him out, cancelled all the charges against Imran Khan. Right after, I think we discussed in a previous episode how there was a completely all-out physical attack on his residence.
Yeah.
So this is by and large what's been going on. And I mean, there's more to it, but I guess we'll have the second question for it.
Yeah, which is, and actually we are slightly pressed for time, so as briefly as you perhaps can, recount for us the conditions in which all of this political sort of upheaval or struggle is ongoing in Pakistan, because situation for the common people, working people in Pakistan, is not getting any easier. And whether it was the Imran Khan government before April of last year, or Shahbaz Sharif and those who have followed, no solutions really in sight for the multi-pronged kind of crises that Pakistan is going through.
Right, Siddhant. So, I mean, you already pointed out how there's a comprehensive terror, operation that's going to be launched. We'll come to how the government is prioritizing its, moves later. But two things that are very interesting to point out is having a comprehensive terrorism operation right now points to two things. That's first, terrorism right now in the country is being used. The charges are being used to crush down all political dissent. So we know for one that there have been a lot of terrorist attacks in the peripheral provinces by the Taliban. That's a fact. That's true. Second thing would be TTP, the truce with TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, was introduced in the Imran Khan government. So somewhere this is a slight signaling of how the present security situation is really Imran Khan's and his government's fault. Second, finally, one thing that gets highlighted is that whether it's the Pashtun leaders in the north, or whether it is political dissent from other parties from the PTI, all of them are being charged under terrorism. So when we really say comprehensive terrorism, washing out of that, what it really may mean is washing out of all political dissent.
And impunity for state forces to sort of act at the behest of the government in that sense.
Right. And I mean, all of this is coming at a time when we are seeing that there are food riots happening in the country. There have been casualties. Around 16 deaths have taken place. So that's one thing for sure. And inflation is high. The energy prices have peaked. 120% is the hike in the wheat prices. So these are the things that the government should really be focusing on. Instead, the economy somehow becomes the reason to perhaps move in a more autocratic government. So that's what we're seeing that's happening in Pakistan.
Distracting the people, I guess, also from the issues at hand as much as possible. Shreya, and also, why have a colonial era sedition law when you can have an updated anti-terror law instead to quell all kinds of dissent? Thanks very much for your update this Saturday, Shreya. On that note, we bring to a close this week's coverage of the news and global affairs on the Daily Debrief. As always, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for details on these stories and all of the other work we do. We'll be back next week with a 5-day-a-week schedule, hopefully bringing you the stories behind the headlines and perspectives from the Global South on what is making headlines around the world. Don't forget, in the meanwhile, to give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. And stay safe. We'll see you on Monday. Goodbye.